Hello and welcome. It's bittersweet to have reached the end of this wonderful program. And I'm happy to say that it maybe we didn't save the best for last, but we certainly saved one of the best for the last. I hope you enjoyed Aoife's presentation as much as I did. I'm delighted to introduce her. She is, of course, currently at the National Gallery of Ireland in Dublin, but has previously held posts at the Getty and the National Gallery in London. She's a specialist in Baroque, Italian, and Spanish painting, and her work tends to focus very much on materials and processes. And so she is an art historian close to my heart as well, as that's an interest, as you all know, of mine. Upcoming projects, one I'm particularly excited about is titled Food and Feasting in Golden Age Spain. And so that is something that we all can look very much forward to, hopefully seeing in person in Dublin at some point. So without further ado, I will start with the questions. And I believe, Aoife, you brought a PowerPoint presentation as well.
I certainly did.
Excellent. So I'll start with the first. We're going to go through the questions in the order they were submitted, actually, on the Canvas website. So the first one is about the fate of the artworks that were formerly attributed to Baylavkas. And the question is there research or any studies in progress to find out more about their rightful legacy and place in history?
Well, this was a great question. And it's one that's difficult to answer in that there is no formal study of these paintings. And I should say that we have an awful lot of paintings like this in our stores. I've shown you a small selection of them that once, were linked to Velasquez or attributed to Velasquez. But there are many more. As a national institution, one of the stipulations that we have to abide by is that we cannot deaccession works. So the stores are really rich with things for study. That being said, I'm really happy to say that I am working through some of these works with one of our conservators, Myrna Lydon, who was the conservator who worked on our 6 prodigal son pictures that you will see in Texas early in 2022. And we are doing some technical analysis on our on the Spanish collection that does have firm attribution, as well as other items that don't have firm attribution. Now, some of these pictures, I think we know what they are, and others we're less certain about. So, I mean, this Pope Innocent, there are question marks around. We no longer think it's by Velasquez, which certainly does not appear to be by the hand of Velasquez himself. But that being said, it does appear to be a Spanish 17th century picture, and therefore warrants a little more attention. Some of the others I showed you, this portrait of Torquato Tasso, the Italian poet. It's pretty heavy-handed. You can see here it's very dirty, but the little cleaning test, I think, was as much as our conservators did to it before they decided that it wasn't necessarily high on our list of priorities to pursue. This little Infanta, I think, is an interesting picture as well, and one that we might look into again. You saw this really interesting X-ray, which fascinates me, of a virgin and child that appears to lie beneath it. But that again suggests to us that this is probably a later picture that was painted on a 17th century canvas to try to give the illusion of a 17th century picture. And then we had this, and this is, I think, one of the higher quality works that I showed you. I don't know what you think, Amanda. I don't think it's Spanish. I do think it's Italian.
Yeah. I'm squinting at it, but yes.
Well, it's funny you say that because it's a portrait of Guercino, who's the little squinter.
Yeah, that's right.
He has a squint, and it's a wonderful portrait. We do know that Velasquez visited Guercino in Cento. He admired this artist, and he traveled out of his way to visit Guercino's studio. But I don't think this is a Spanish picture. That being said, I am an Italian specialist, and so it's something I would like to look at anyway. Mm-hmm. But the attribution to Velasquez is kind of anomalous. I was looking back when I received this question, and I was thinking about it, and I looked at Mayer's article, this German art historian who first made this attribution in 1927. And I mean, he says, "It is indeed sufficiently evident that the picture is Spanish, and I believe it's certainly of the Sevillian school. And then he goes on to say, I confess frankly that I do not know any other painter but Velasquez who could have executed in this noble manner and liquid technique passages like the hair and beard in the Dublin portrait. So I think it would be interesting even for us to find out how it was that he came upon this picture, because there's no documentary evidence to tell us,
Yeah.
and why he placed it so firmly and certainly in this, in Velasquez's hands.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about, what shapes people's ability to attribute things or their motivations to attribute things over time. Um,
Sure.
and you think I guess we take for granted we have good images available to us now to compare. But you kind of wonder, like, what else is he looking at
Well,
that's
I
making
must
him think this is Baylavkas?
I have to assume that he was in Dublin, because I don't know that
Yeah.
this is a painting that would have been illustrated anywhere. It was, as
Mm,
I say, it was one of many that do languish in our stores, and I don't say that in a neglectful way, but it's just
yeah.
one of a very, very large number, a very large collection. And so he must have come and it caught his eye, and even that warrants attention. But
Yeah.
as you say, Amanda, today we have better photography, we have, incredible technical analysis at our disposal, and so
Hmm.
by working with conservators, hopefully we will be able to hone these pictures into their rightful contexts. These ones are ones that we know about. These are
Hmm.
Miguel Pineda Montan. He's a known copyist of Velasquez, and he made these fantastic things. I think they are, and they're a sign of their times as well. Los Barrochos is pretty spectacular, and it's a
Yeah.
full-sized copy. So when I
Yeah,
say
this is
copy, I don't mean it.
fascinating. I really enjoyed this part of your talk.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, toured Ireland, and I found that even brilliant. The idea that school kids would have had this, appearing in their classroom. I don't know how they got it in the
Absolutely.
door.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's a big thing. But these are all signed, so that helps us. We know what these are. But again, these are illustrative of this sort of, I was saying, the Velasquez fever. That
Yeah.
that people wanted copies of Velasquez. People really valued them, and we have illustrations of Velasquez fever in our own collection. And I wanted to show you
Mm.
this one.
Oh
This is
my.
this is an early 20th century portrait by Sir John Lavery, who was a contemporary and a friend of Joaquin Sorolla,
Right.
so would have interacted very much with Spanish painters, and with, of contemporary painters of his, and of the past. And this is an homage to Las Meninas. So you can see
Absolutely.
that Lavery is really, engaging in this Velasquez fever.
It reminds me a
The
little bit of Sargent as well, kind of playing with that same sort of composition in his own way. Yeah.
Absolutely, and they're all part of the same circle.
Mhm.
Akemi will tell you that we found so many links, how many dinners and letters and things between these artists,
Oh, I love
and
it.
they all, in common, the one thing they have in common is Diego Velázquez and their love for the Spanish Golden Age. So I think that's where all the Pineda portraits, or the Pineda copies, I should say, that's where they come from. That's the
Mhm.
context that they live in.
The question hits on a really kind of fascinating issue that we all deal with, which is what we do with what's in our stores and how we prioritize what we do with that. And those of you who remember the Bose exhibition we did at the Meadows, this came up a lot in that context as well. I borrowed 11 paintings from Bose, but like National Gallery of Ireland, they have tons of things that are kind of quasi, maybe Murillo, maybe Baylavkas, maybe Spanish, maybe not, in their stores. And it's a matter of kind of coming up with a way to systematically go through them, and the practicalities of the kind of labor and methodology we place on that.
It really is. I have decades of work if I wanted it in our stores. And maybe there are things to be found. We always have to reassess and reevaluate, and use modern tools and not take things for granted. It's important that we do challenge what we know about pictures, and give them another chance sometimes. I have a very small exhibition next year of 16th century Italian panels in the gallery. It's just of our own permanent collection, but it's bringing some paintings out of storage that haven't been shown ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's talking about this concept, of how museum professionals rate pictures and decide what deserves a space on the wall and what doesn't. And I think that question was very interesting in that regard.
Well, and institutional history as well. It's worth noting for those of you who don't know that until Aoife came to the National Gallery of Ireland, there were no curators working on Spanish Baroque for a number of years. Is that correct?
Yes, my predecessor, Sergio Benedetti, retired 12 years before I was appointed. There were several reasons for that. There was a freeze on hiring in public institutions after the recession in 2008, and that made a big impact on us. But even Sergio, was at his heart, and you can probably tell by his name, an Italian specialist. And so individual curators shape the way research on a collection is formed as well.
Yeah. Shameless plug. This is precisely why the Meadows has 2 fellowships for pre and postdoctoral fellows to specifically train future museum professionals in Spanish art, to kind of balance that Italian lean, let's say, historically. Shall we, speaking of Spanish paintings, let's say we can move on to the next question, which was,
Sure.
does your museum have any El Greco or Dolly paintings? If not, do you intend to acquire any? And of course, I know you're absolutely stunning El Greco, so I'm hoping you brought a slide, but I wasn't sure about Dolly.
Can you see? I hope you can see this on screen, by the way. You can you?
Yes, I can.
Good.
I hope
Good.
everyone, yeah.
I never know. It's terrible. You share the screen and you stare into the abyss and you hope for the best. One day I'll be able to come and show things to you in person, I hope. But yeah, we have this beautiful El Greco. It's St. Francis, you can see here. This is actually considered the prime version of many versions of this composition that El Greco painted during the course of his career. And it's interesting to say that in the context of some of the other questions that came in that talk about, what's the first or what's the original. But El Greco specialists do seem to deem this the original of a series. And I think it's a beautiful painting. It's in a beautiful format. It hangs with it hangs among our Spanish and Italian collections. It sort of straddles the two, even though he's Greek. And I think it's a really nice example. As for Dolly, we do not have a Dolly. Oh, sorry, you can see my golden retriever walking down the driveway. We don't have a Dolly, and Dolly is nothing to do with me, in that I only look after our collection up until 1850. So we have a collection that is rather sizable, and as a result we're very well divided in what we take care of. So I oversee paintings up to 1850, Italian and Spanish paintings, and after 1850 my colleague Janet McLean takes over, and so she looks after our modern Spanish paintings. And we don't have a Salvador Dali, and it's again an interesting question. Our modern collection is perhaps not as developed as our old masters, and that is because, as a national institution, it's amazing all of the rules that are written into into the way we work. But for a long, long time, in fact, up until the last decade, we have had what was known as the 50-year rule in place, and the 50-year rule meant that we could not purchase anything that had been made in the last 50 years. And
so fascinating.
If you think about it, Dali would have been studying art in the very early 1920s. So it wouldn't have been until the 70s that we could have acquired even an early Dali.
Yeah.
So we kind of missed the boat, I suppose. Yeah. But we do have a beautiful Picasso that I hope you can see here. Again, not in my collection, but sometimes pulled in for lectures and things. And it's a really fine example, again, early Picasso.
Yeah.
And then we have Juan Gris. We have some really gorgeous Picasso drawings as well. And then here's a Gris collage. There's actually supposed to be a second image there. I don't know, it's dropped away. And this is I was going to say a painting, but it's a mixed media object that will be conserved in the next couple of years under the Getty Canvas initiative, which is interesting because it is partially canvas, partially newspaper, partially paper. And I think that'll be a really nice sort of study into the Cubist technique, the collage technique. So yeah, we do engage with the Spanish masters, or Spanish moderns, as to whether we will ever acquire a Salvador Dali. It depends on whether someone's willing to give us one, because I'm not sure that we could afford one.
Yeah,
We'll see.
As many of you may know, Dolly was a gap in the Meadows collection for some time. For a museum dedicated to Spanish art, not having a painting by Dolly was really a something we we lamented, and we didn't acquire a Dolly until 2014. And sorry, now you can hear my dog in the background, maybe. But they're not easy to come by, and they're not cheap. So especially if you want, a good one. Works on paper, a different story, but yeah. So, but I was glad to see that Gree. I had no idea that was in the collection. It'll be very interesting to see how the conservation goes.
I'll keep you posted.
Yeah. It gets tricky anytime you have mixed media like that. We have a Fuluaga that is on paper. It's a landscape on paper mounted to canvas, and getting it conserved was complicated because of the way conservators specialize, of course. So let's see. The next question is, did Baylavkas have a donor who requested the Emmaus picture to be painted for them, or did he paint this for his studio? Which of the 3 paintings of Baylavkas's were painted first, second, or third in succession?
Okay, well, I think we'll separate those out because they're two.
Exactly.
That's okay.
Let's start one at a time. Yeah, let's start with the donor. Was there a donor for the Emmaus picture?
Sure. Well, short answer, we don't know. Yeah. We don't have any documentary evidence relating to this painting. Nothing that firmly tells us when it was painted. So it's dated. The date that we give to it is based on style and technique, but we don't have anything to tell us where it went. We don't have very early provenance for it, so it's a bit of a mystery. But there have been a number of theories thrown around. Again, it's all about who can pose the most convincing theory, really, in the absence of documentary evidence.
Right.
As to whether it had a specific patron or an intended destination versus being created as a studio picture for the open market, I presume that's what that implies.
Mm-hmm.
I think the general consensus is that this was something that was probably painted for a specific place. I showed you the similarities with the National Gallery London's Christ in the House of Mary and Martha, and it's often suggested that both this painting and Christ in the House of Mary and Martha were commissioned for a nun's refectory, maybe because the reference to food and dining in there, or, as I said in the lecture, a convent guest room, maybe. It's been suggested that both paintings again were painted for the Hospital de Santa Maria in Seville, which was a place that, its primary function was to feed the poor of the city. So again, you get these references in the paintings to charity and food and dining, and so and people being welcomed into the home and that kind of thing. So all of these things together sort of lead people to believe that it's likely that, given that the Supper at Emmaus has been inserted into the background, that this probably served a specific function.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's so many. I could keep going. There's the Duke of Alcala is another one that people suggest it may have been made for his home, because the National Gallery London painting. Anyway, there's a description. I think it's in the early 1600s. There's a description of a painting in his home with a woman pounding garlic. So that's led people to say that maybe that's that. But again, we're all the time just trying to figure it out. And then other people suggest it might have been for the Archbishop Quinones, who was writing about the baptism of Africans in Seville at this time.
Fascinating.
But we really can only theorize in the absence of documents.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, when Aoife was talking about the possible placement of this in a refectory, in a monastery or in a convent, that is the space where the monks or nuns dine. But it's also a place, because it's part of a monastery, it's also a place in which certain ritual takes place, certain biblical readings are read out. And so even though it's a kind of dining area, it's not a secular space necessarily. So the idea of these paintings being in this kind of very specific monastic context is very fascinating, and kind of bridges the way the painting does bridges that gap between domestic and religious function, I guess.
Exactly. And I mean, if you think Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper is in a refectory, so
Exactly. Thank
that gives you a sense. These weren't just kitchens; they were
right.
really important spaces for nuns or monks. And the format of this painting and the London painting, they match. They're almost identical in dimensions, and it like that long horizontal format suggests to me, at least, that it probably was meant to fit somewhere specific.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a picture that was painted to sit in the studio and be sold. This was painted very early in the artist's career. The variants that omit the Supper at Emmaus in the background may have been painted for the open market. I mean, but again, it's very difficult for us to say.
Yeah. So shall we now turn to the 3 paintings and the order of events insofar as we can surmise them?
Sure. Okay. This isn't easy, really.
I know. I was going to say these are tough questions.
No, I'm glad that you guys asked them, because they're questions, to be honest with you, that scholars of this period are still discussing. So I can't give you unequivocal answers. I wish I could. I would have written many books at this point if I could answer these questions. Generally, it is believed that the National Gallery of Ireland's painting was the first. And many people similarly believe that it's the first existing painting or surviving painting that can be attributed to Velasquez, full stop. So this is put at 1617 or 1618, right when Velasquez exits Pacheco's studio. And there are a few different reasons for this. Pacheco famously used very hard contours and delineated his figures and his still life elements very, very carefully. And you can see those real crisp lines in the Dublin painting. That this is the Dublin painting, top left here, that give that sort of almost silhouette to the woman. When you look at both the Chicago and the Houston versions, you get a slightly more painterly treatment, and a sort of loose application of paint that is associated with a slightly more mature artist. But again, you're talking about years between them, not decades. So it's not an easy task to say with absolute certainty what comes first. Technical analysis has been done on all 3, and it's not been massively revealing either.
Yeah, and it's not something that carbon 14 dating or anything could shed light on, because that only gives you date ranges. And on a side note, I completely agree with you that this is a woman.
Thank you. Yeah.
Particularly because of the hair being covered. So
it's funny, until I read that in the literature some years ago.
Yeah.
I had never thought of this figure as anything else. And not that it matters necessarily, but I just always saw her as female. And I think it's something to do with her stature and the way she's holding herself as well.
Well, at first I started thinking, okay, am I being, am I doing this because she's in the kitchen? And then I thought, no, and maybe it's the medievalist in me, but covering your hair is a very important thing for women. So and it's a way, when we have ambiguous figures in lots of paintings, that we can help identify is whether or not a figure is veiled. Not that this is a veil, but yeah.
No, it's a head covering, certainly. And I do think that the first time that people started to explore the idea of this person being male was when the Palomino comparison came up. And
right, of course.
Desire to fit things in. And art historians, we're terrible for this. We like to complete the puzzle.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying to you here, I'm being quite honest in that I can't answer the questions, and I wish I could, but you can't force the evidence. So
Yeah. No, and it happens all the time with Vasari, doesn't it?
all the time that people find a really nice, neat, what they see as a really nice, neat I don't know, conclusion or answer to something, and then they fit the evidence in around it. And it's not necessarily a deliberate act. I just mean it's our nature, I suppose, as detectives, in a way, that we want to find answers. And sometimes,
Well, that leads us in perfectly to the next question, which was about the quality of the three works, and is one of them of superior quality, or and yeah, is there
I
one
think
that's or even in better condition? I mean, I'll add, that wasn't part of the question asked, but I'm
sure.
throwing it in
No, 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 that's a very good question. And I think, right, well, this is a difficult one, isn't it? Because obviously one painting is in my collection, so I'm biased, haven't I? And I have spent a lot of time with this painting, so
there. Yes.
it's my favorite. But no, I have not seen the Houston version, so I can't comment unequivocally on that. I have seen the Chicago version, and I was very impressed. I think it's a beautiful object.
Mhm.
Um, and they are different. I mean, I know when you look at them on screen here, you say, well, here's three of the same thing, but they're not. They're illustrative of different moments, I think, in Velasquez's early life.
Yeah.
I don't absolutely reject any of them.
Yeah.
I think to do so is would be unfair, and I think that Zahira Velis was the conservator who made the attribution to Velasquez in Houston, and it was incredibly convincing. And
Yeah.
she illustrated aspects of Velasquez's technique and working methods that people had not really delved into before, and she made a very good argument for this painting that I can't really pick holes in.
Yeah.
As to which of them is the best quality, that's a difficult thing again. I mean, the three of them, I should say, have suffered in their histories, and it's funny. I think Valise says the same thing, that this is something that happens to almost all paintings that are 400 plus years old. You know, this is sort of they're going to be casualties of their history, and because of the size, the scale of these works, I'm sure they were bandied around. They were packed up and shipped here and shipped there. So all
Roll.
three
Yeah.
all three have been chopped and messed with and abraded, and I don't mean chopped as in literally, but I mean, I'm sure, taken off their stretchers, relined, put back onto stretchers,
Yeah.
cleaned. As you know, our painting, early in the 20th century, had its Supper at Emmaus painted out entirely, and it wasn't until, I think, mid 20th century that a conservator found it, cleaned it off, and revealed the scene in the background again. So you're looking at paintings that aren't maybe as beautiful as they may have been when they exited the studio, first of all. And so we have to be kind. We can't base everything on what they look like right now.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think, sorry, Amanda, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, but I do really love your point about how the Dublin picture has these kind of more crisp contours that we associate with the time in which Baylavkas was really in Seville and learning, whereas the other two have kind of a little bit more freedom in the brushwork.
Well, that's it. And I mean, by that token, you can apply certain merits to some and others to the others. So while I think, that the crisp contours of ours are beautiful, I similarly, the intuitive brushwork that's evident on the Houston version, and similarly on the Chicago version, is also, admirable and interesting and beautiful. And the other thing is, I think we all have to be careful of, and it's something, again, it's human nature to try to find the real one.
Yeah.
People all the time want to know which is the first, which is the best,
Yeah.
which is the original.
We're
And
slightly obsessed with primacy, aren't we?
totally. And these concepts of originality just did not exist in the 17th century.
Yeah.
This is not how Velasquez would have viewed his works. He would have viewed these as an evolution. And so I think that the three paintings get together can really be viewed as a journey almost. Do you know what I mean? You're not looking at one painting and two copies, one original and two copies. You're looking at three attempts on the same theme. And so, that's that. There doesn't have to necessarily be one that wins. It's not a competition.
Yeah. No, and for those of you in the audience who know our El Greco St. Francis, or now that you've seen Dublin's St. Francis receiving the stigmata, this is another instance in which we have, the same subject treated by the artist in many times, and we can't necessarily rank them as easily as we'd like.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about it is that Velasquez was not alone in creating copies and variants after his own works, autograph variants, in the 17th century. This is something that artists habitually did in the 17th century, particularly, and there was a demand for this. You know, people wanted copies or variants on a theme. They didn't necessarily want the original. They didn't want a new, you know, they didn't want something different.
Yeah.
So those ideas are sort of difficult to apply in a 17th century context. As for, I mean, I was looking at them again. It's really interesting how these were made, and it does sort of show a lot of Velasquez's working process. So you're looking at all three paintings in the same position, but just sort of transparent. And when you start to sit them on top of each other, it's quite fascinating. So you see, they are all slightly different. They're not absolute copies of each other. When you line the kitchen made up, you notice that the bowls and the jugs and everything start to kind of go out of alignment. And this is because it looks as though from the very outset, Velasquez is using, and this is again Zahira Valise, is using templates for each, not an all-encompassing cartoon or tracing, but templates for each individual aspect, and he's reapplying them again and again.
Yeah.
And we see these bowls again in the Apsley house, the men dining, the men lunching. And,
right.
you know, so
Yes. Yeah.
I think again, you know, you're just looking at the artist reworking themes at different points and different moments, and trying it again.
And I'll just add, because there was a question in the chat, a number of artists used stencils or tracings and things like that. Leonardo da Vinci, quite famously. And the way we know this is partly by doing what Aoife just did, is placing things on top of each other. But sometimes there is actual evidence of pouncing on the surface of the canvas, or thanks to underdrawing, even when
Velasquez, incisions are the big one, but
exactly, incisions, which is why we use X radiography. That's one of the big things that we use X-ray to reveal as incisions, and that's from physically putting something on the surface of the canvas. So I think we're 3 minutes over, so we might go ahead and close, I think. But thank you so much, Aoife, for joining us and for your PowerPoint. And especially, I really enjoyed that little bit at the end where we got to see everything overlap. So thank you very much for joining us.